This episode of the Danger Close podcast is brought to you by Bravo Company Manufacturing. Welcome to this special bonus episode of the Jack Carr Danger Close podcast. Listen to Ray Porter reading Chapter 2 of my latest novel, Red Sky Mourning. Enjoy.
Chapter 2. Sacramento, California. Congresswoman Christine Harding hated Sacramento. Thank God the Golden State also had San Francisco and Los Angeles. The future of the nation couldn't be trusted to farmers. Qu'il mange de la brioche. As a lifelong political animal, she understood why Alec Christensen had chosen that bitch Gail Olsen as his running mate. She was younger, not unattractive, and an Army veteran, even if she was just a jag. She was also of Cuban descent, but more importantly, she represented Florida's 9th District. California's 54 electoral votes were already going to Christensen. He had needed Florida to win, and he got it. Olsen had beaten her to the White House, even if she wasn't at the top of the ticket. The party was slow to understand the power of the technologies that Christensen used to build and solidify his base, and by the time they realized it, he already had unstoppable momentum. He could not be bought, as he didn't need money, and his background could not have been more ideally suited for the highest office in the land. When he announced Gail Olsen as his running mate, the party begrudgingly got behind them. They were the golden ticket, and as nervous as the establishment was about two relatively young candidates outside their control, the other side could not be allowed to win. The media talked endlessly of a return to Camelot. What nonsense. The press had a hard time letting go of that period in American history. Nostalgia. Harding did not suffer from that affliction. John F. Kennedy was dead, as was his brother. Harding had been young, just 7 years old when Kennedy was shot, but she remembered. She remembered her parents glued to the television. She could feel their grief. She felt the country's grief. And now she was in position to occupy the very office as had Kennedy, an opportunity to sit at the same resolute desk. In one of the closest elections on record, he had won by the narrowest of margins over Richard Nixon in November 1960. She remembered her parents that night, too, their hope and optimism. She was old enough to understand their generation had been shaped by the Great Depression and the Second World War, and how the looming shadow of the Soviet Union threatened not just America but the entire world. Kennedy represented a brighter future. Then he was shot down, not unlike President Christensen. Camelot was as dead as its king. There was no going back. The world had changed, and if you didn't change with it, you'd be buried just like those former presidents. Harding looked to the future. A global future. America first was a punchline. With the election of President Christensen and Vice President Olsen, it appeared that Harding was out of contention. The appetite for an older president had faded. She had missed her window. Her political career would continue in the legislative branch. She had been so close. But then the field shifted. President Christensen had been killed in that tragic bombing. IEDs? EFPs, if she remembered correctly. She didn't know exactly how they worked, but apparently even presidential armored motorcade vehicles were no match for them. That assassination had propelled Gail Olsen into the Oval Office, the first female president in United States history. But she had assumed the office by default. She had not been elected president, not really. The auspices under which she had taken the oath would hang over her presidency. Not until she was officially elected president by the voting public with her at the top of the ticket could she emerge from Christensen's shadow. Unfortunately for Harding, who watched the polls like a hawk, that election looked promising. The Congresswoman had thought all hope was lost until Olsen made the surprise announcement that she would not be running for re-election. A scandal was brewing. Harding could smell it a mile away. If there was anything that Americans liked more than an underdog story, it was scandal and a fall from grace. The rumors had been swirling for years, even before Christensen named Olsen as his running mate. It wasn't her husband's philandering that would sink her. The liberal media ignored it, and aside from a few AM radio hosts and podcasters, the conservative media didn't touch it. It wasn't his failure as an attorney or even his career as an opioid lobbyist, which made him inherently unlikable and slimy across the board. Rather, it was the influence peddling. Almost everyone, without exception, in Washington, D.C. was involved in influence peddling in one way or another to varying degrees. It was baked into the fabric of the culture. Why did people think that powerful people in huge corporations and industries, domestic and foreign, spent so much money there? Wealth, power, privilege, and influence were not just currency for barter in the city on the Potomac. Their appeal was global. Harding was going to take it to the next level. Discreetly. Discretion. That was the attribute lacking in Olsen's husband. If you lived within the system, you could thrive. Money was a critical component. It greased the wheels and made the system work. In fact, what the media termed influence peddling was legal in many respects. It was a gray area, a very wide one, but there were rules. Politicians, for the most part, did not take briefcases full of money from foreign agents or corporate fixers at seedy bars. That was not how it was done, unless one was not very bright and didn't mind a lengthy stay at a federal correctional facility. There were numerous other ways, and everyone knew it. It was entrenched in the American political ethos. Whether they realized it or not, a deal had been struck with the citizenry. In exchange for this blatant political corruption, the people were to receive relative safety and stability. Politicians and those with whom they were connected could not thumb their nose at either the system or the American people. Working-class citizens could tolerate only so much. You had to pay them lip service. Don't be obvious and publicly sell clearly hideous artwork to party donors or foreign agents after taking an interest in painting a week earlier. Even the most ardent party apologists and loyalists had a hard time defending that one with a straight face. No, you had to be smart about it. And Harding was smart. The Honorable Christine Harding exited the black armored SUV on 10th Street in front of the California State Capitol. Her dark blue St. John knits pantsuit was the uniform of influential female politicians across the nation, perfectly tailored to convey just the right story. Powerful without being bitchy, confident without being overbearing, smart without being elitist. If she was going to be elected to the highest office in the land, she would need the support of women and men. Politics was a delicate game, especially today. Even though she was in her late 60s and had come of age in a time before the internet, she recognized the influence of social media. Just as JFK had leveraged the power of a new medium called television, Harding had adapted by embracing the latest apps. Going viral on TikTok with a legion of young fans had certainly helped, but she also needed to appeal to those who would actually exercise their right to vote. Her campaign was a full-spectrum approach to manipulation. It was time to move closer to the middle to appeal to independents. Today was just such an opportunity. Flanked by her Secret Service detail, she marched across the courtyard toward the impressive white neoclassical domed structure, its fluted Corinthian columns and arched granite base attracting her with the force of a magnet. Tall green trees stood like sentries, lining the wide path that led to the heart of California political power. The impressive structure was completed in 1874 and constructed to look like the U.S. Capitol in D.C. Harding felt right at home. She had requested and been granted early Secret Service protection by the Department of Homeland Security, not because she was actually concerned for her safety, but because of the optics. It looked presidential, and looking presidential was half the battle. She would be photographed and filmed arriving in her black armored SUV, protected by Secret Service agents, and in moments, she would stop in front of the Capitol building to take questions asked by hand-selected reporters from friendly news organizations. One would be hard-pressed to orchestrate a more presidential-looking appearance. In what was meant to appear spontaneous but had in reality been coordinated by her public relations team, a swarm of reporters converged on her as she confidently took the steps up to the front of the Capitol. Some had iPhones or DSLR cameras, while others, from established news networks, held microphones and were trailed by cameramen carrying large video cameras on their shoulders. Even Harding had to remind herself they were now called camera operators, though she couldn't recall ever seeing a camera woman. "One at a time," she said with a kind but confident smile over the milieu. "Do you feel you have a lock on your party's nomination? Would you support a federal moratorium on the death penalty if elected president like we have here in California? How do you reconcile your support for new taxes on guns and ammunition with your pledge to not raise taxes? Would you support additional federal funding to replace police officers with social workers and mental health professionals? Would you continue to support student loan forgiveness once in office? Who is on your short list for VP? Would you support a federal fracking ban based on the California model? Will California's 2035 goal of banning all gas-powered car production be a national initiative for your administration? Will you sign an executive order to provide health care for undocumented residents countrywide? Do you stand by your pledge to ban assault weapons on your first day in office? Do you think the country should follow California's example and put forward legislation to further regulate vehicle speed limits? She answered each question diplomatically, using the contrived opportunity to move toward more centrist positions in the lead-up to November. She had momentum. This was her time. Harding held up her hands as she finished. There was business to attend to inside. "Thank you," she said. The Congresswoman began to turn, but then stopped and looked back to the cameras. "And one final thing," she said, shoulders back, tall and striking, with clear eyes and just the right amount of smile. "Don't forget to vote."
Until the next time, take care out there, stay safe, be strong, keep fighting.